A woman in heels parked a mimosa bar on my compost heap and called it ambience. That's when I realized I wasn't living next to a neighbor. I was living under HOA Karen, the self-declared queen of the HOA, who hijacked my backyard for her daughter's wedding like it was a Pottery Barn photo shoot. No invitation, no warning, just a clipboard, a smirk, and a 12-piece band trampling my tomatoes. So I did what any sane man would do. I brought in the bike. I returned home from vacation to discover my neighbor hosting her daughter's wedding in my garden without even asking. White chairs crushed my zucchini, a champagne tent flattened my herbs, and Hoa Karen smiled as if she'd done me a favor. Relax, she said breezily, waving a manicured hand. We left your weird herbs alone. How far can one entitled HOA president push before the quiet neighbor next door finally snaps and decides to fight absurdity with even greater absurdity? Standing there, jaw hanging open like a mailbox left ajar, I watched as caterers hurry across my lawn carrying platters of finger sandwiches, trampling through what had once been neatly arranged garden rows. My carefully tended heirloom tomatoes, now casualties of a pastel-colored wedding dream, lay crushed beneath expensive rented shoes. It was surreal, a cross between a bad sitcom and a botanical war crime. I caught sight of two of my neighbors sitting in chairs that had replaced my cucumbers, casually sipping champagne as though this was the Ritz instead of my own backyard. One even raised a glass, smiling, completely unaware that I wasn't part of the catering crew. Good old George from 3 doors down, oblivious as ever. I actually had the audacity to lean over and ask if I could grab him another mimosa. Make it extra bubbly, he added with a chuckle. Before I could answer, preferably something involving colorful language, Hoa Karen swooped into view, clipboard gripped in one hand, her rhinestone sunglasses glinting aggressively in the sun. The self-appointed dictator of our subdivision, she ruled with iron-fisted kindness, dishing out passive-aggressive comments at bake sales and scrutinizing lawn heights with an obsessive dedication. She was infamous for using phrases like neighborhood harmony and community aesthetic as weapons of suburban warfare. Back early, are we, Dave? She trilled, approaching like she owned the air I breathed. My name was Dan, not Dave, but correcting her felt futile at this point. We assumed you'd be back tomorrow, dear, she continued, her voice dripping with faux concern. I actually really needed a venue with that rustic charm. You understand, don't you? No, Karen, I managed to reply evenly, resisting the urge to start pulling out folding chairs like weeds. I really don't. She clicked her tongue, looking disappointed in my obvious lack of community spirit. It's Hoa Karen, actually. You know that? She tapped her badge with an overly manicured nail. Official title, dear. Respect goes both ways. Respect. Clearly, that was a one-way street around here. My hands clenched, imagining how satisfying it would feel to fling her precious clipboard into the neighbor's koi pond. Anyway, she breezed on, oblivious to my internal battle. Don't fret about the plants. We'll reimburse you for those little green things later. She waved dismissively toward my devastated zucchinis, as though they were an unfortunate spill on aisle 5. Just stay out of the wedding photos. It's actually a special day, you know. I stood in silence as she strutted away, her voice echoing orders at hapless caterers, while I simmered helplessly. My blood pressure hit numbers usually reserved for space missions. This wasn't just annoying, it was an invasion, a horticultural hostage crisis, orchestrated by a woman who clearly believed property lines were mere suggestions. Retreating to my porch to regain composure, I considered calling the sheriff. But knowing our small town, he'd probably say this was a civil matter, code for please don't drag me into Hoa Karen's vortex of doom again. I could already picture Deputy Thompson's tired expression. So I sat there fuming, forced into spectator mode, watching my backyard become a backdrop for pretentious suburbanites, posing beside my maple tree as though it were a Hollywood premiere. Guests occasionally glanced my way, smiling politely, assuming I was some quaint rustic gardener hired for authenticity. Then it hit me. If Hoa Karen could exploit some obscure HOA rule to commandeer my property, maybe I could fight fire with gasoline. She loved rules, obsessed over them. But rules, as it happened, could cut both ways, particularly if wielded by someone feeling especially spiteful. A slow smile formed as a plan crystallized. Hoa Karen wanted rustic charm? I'd give her rustic charm. I just need some help from a few friends down at the Broken Wheel Tavern, known for their creativity and remarkable talent for causing spectacular chaos. Because if there's anything an entitled Karen hates more than a messy yard, it's losing control. And I was about to ensure she experienced both. Sitting on my porch, the scent of crushed herbs wafting mockingly around me, I watched as Ashley's rehearsal dinner commenced without a hitch. Or rather, entirely with a hitch, but on my damn lawn. I considered briefly storming down there and flipping tables, but I'd learned from long experience that rage-fueled outbursts were the playground of amateurs. Professionals plotted quietly, and if I was anything, it was a professional-level plotter. This wasn't a momentary offense. This was war, and war demanded strategy. So instead of making a scene, I stood up calmly, brushed non-existent dirt off my jeans, and headed straight to my truck. If HOA Karen wanted drama, I'd gladly oblige. 20 minutes later, I swung open the creaky wooden door of the Broken Wheel Tavern, the unofficial town headquarters for bikers, ex-military, and anyone who preferred tattoos over HOA rule books. My eyes adjusted to the dim lighting as familiar faces turned, instantly curious. At the back table sat Mitch Chains Campbell, a bearded giant known for his Harley obsession and disdain for everything suburban. Beside him lounged Darcy, a woman whose smile was sweet and whose left hook was legendary. She raised an eyebrow as I approached. "Nan Evans," Chains rumbled, giving me a nod. "You're looking cranky, brother." "HOA Karen at it again." "You wouldn't believe how bad," I said, pulling up a stool. "She hijacked my backyard for her kid's wedding. Literally replaced my zucchini patch with a champagne tent." Chains and Darcy exchanged incredulous looks before bursting into laughter. "Classic Karen," Darcy snorted, shaking her head. "What's next? Claiming your garage for her yoga class?" "Don't give her ideas," I groaned, slapping a hand on the worn tabletop. But seriously, she crossed the line this time. I need backup. Loud, enthusiastic backup. Chains grinned, revealing a smile that had scared off more than one city inspector. "You got my attention." "Exactly what sort of disruption are we talking here, Evans?" "Let's just say I want it memorable. Loud enough to make her regret every tomato she's crushed," I said, leaning in conspiratorially. "I was thinking bikes, lots of bikes, maybe a little entertainment from your fine group of musicians." I glanced meaningfully at Darcy, who doubled as lead singer of the tavern's infamous metal cover band Chainsaw Serenade. She slapped the table excitedly, eyes glittering. "You had me at revenge. We've got a new cover of Here Comes the Bride that sounds like Metallica got into a bar fight with Aerosmith. Perfect for a suburban wedding." I chuckled, picturing the horror on HOA Karen's carefully powdered face. "Can you guys get the crew together by tomorrow afternoon? The actual ceremony starts at 3, and I want her to get a proper soundtrack." Chains cracked his knuckles, leaning back with satisfaction. "Leave it to us, brother. We'll make it a wedding they'll never forget. Hell, we'll even dress for the occasion, leather tuxedos and all." Feeling more optimistic, I left the tavern with a smile and a thumbs up from the bartender, who overheard just enough to piece together my dastardly intentions. On the drive back, I envisioned the perfect poetic Fustus awaiting Karen, the woman who lectured neighbors about noise ordinances, waking up to a symphony of motorcycles and screaming guitars, the woman obsessed with pristine lawns, seeing her dream event turn into a chaotic rock and roll circus. Pulling back into my driveway later that evening, I saw Karen across the lawn lecturing the florist with wild hand gestures. Our eyes met briefly, and she flashed me a patronizing smile, clearly mistaking my newfound calmness for defeat. "Hope you enjoy the ceremony tomorrow," she called out cheerily. "We'll save you some cake." "Oh, trust me, Karen," I replied with a sincere grin. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." She looked momentarily puzzled, clearly sensing something amiss, before shrugging it off and turning away. Big mistake, I thought, smiling wider. Karen thought she'd won, blissfully unaware that I'd just set into motion the most gloriously chaotic revenge she'd ever experienced. Because when you mess with a man's zucchini patch, sooner or later you're gonna pay, with interest. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and deceptively peaceful, as if Mother Nature herself was complicit in HOA Karen's scheme. I stood by my kitchen window nursing a cup of coffee darker than my current mood, watching as the lawn was quickly transformed once again into a scene straight from Karen's wildest Pinterest fantasies. White chairs gleamed mockingly in the sunlight, and the elegant arch now perched exactly where my award-winning cucumbers had thrived. HOA Karen glided through my yard like an overzealous general, barking orders into her glittery phone. But today, instead of boiling rage, I felt oddly serene. Calmness tends to accompany revenge, especially revenge prepared with meticulous attention to chaos. Karen had no clue what awaited her, and that made the bitter coffee taste sweeter. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. A text message from Chains lit up the screen. Bike's polished, band tuned, ready to rock her world. Perfect. I grinned, picturing Chains and Darcy preparing their unique brand of suburban disruption. Just then, a gentle knock pulled me from my sweet reverie. On my porch stood Ashley, Karen's daughter, and today's unfortunate bride, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Hey, Mr. Evans," she started shyly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I set down my coffee, curious but wary. "Ashley, listen, if you're here to ask if you can hold a honeymoon in my garage, that's a solid no." Her cheeks flushed, embarrassment quickly replaced by a laugh of genuine amusement. "No, God, no. Trust me, Mom's gone way too far. She sighed heavily. "I had no idea she'd do something this crazy. She told me she talked to you." "Did she now?" I raised an eyebrow skeptically, leaning against the porch railing. Ashley looked down sheepishly, nodding. "You probably think I'm just like her, but I'm not. Honestly, I just wanted a quiet, simple ceremony, not this circus." She gestured helplessly toward the chaos unfolding in my backyard. "This was never my idea." A pang of sympathy crept in, despite my best attempts at maintaining ruthless revenge mode. "Well, Ashley," I sighed, "your mother has her own way of interpreting the rules, usually in her favor." She laughed dryly, nodding. "Yeah, tell me about it." A brief silence settled between us. Finally, she spoke again, hesitant but determined. "Is there anything you could maybe do to help make this less overwhelming?" I considered her sincere request. For a second, I almost faltered, but then Karen's shrill voice carried from the garden, shouting at a terrified florist about uneven rose petals, quickly restoring my resolve. "Tell you what, Ashley," I said finally, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Stick close to the porch when things get interesting. Trust me, you'll have a front row seat to a show worth remembering." She looked puzzled, but offered a cautious smile. "I have no idea what that means, Mr. Evans, but honestly, at this point, I'm desperate enough to trust you." Ashley hurried back toward the wedding prep chaos, just as Karen waved frantically, shouting something about lighting and angles. She turned briefly, giving me an uneasy wave before disappearing back into her mother's meticulously planned nightmare. Poor kid, she had no idea that within a matter of hours, her pastel-colored dream would morph into a biker-themed spectacle of epic proportions. My phone buzzed again, this time with a picture from Darcy Chains and the crew, decked out in studded leather jackets, looking hilariously menacing and entirely prepared to crash this suburban party. Another text quickly followed. "Sound check done. Hope the neighborhood loves heavy metal." I chuckled quietly, pocketing the phone. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but today mine would be served hot, with electric guitars, roaring engines, and a touch of absurd theatricality. I stepped off the porch, humming softly. HOA Karen loved to control everything, never realizing her perfect plans were about to unravel spectacularly. After all, sometimes it takes a quiet neighbor to teach an HOA tyrant the most valuable lesson of all. When you hijack a man's yard for your Pinterest wedding fantasy, be ready for him to deliver a reality check, biker style. By 2 o'clock, the wedding crowd started pouring in. My lawn looked like the setting of some overpriced Netflix rom-com, packed with pastel dresses, bow ties, and uncomfortable smiles. I lurked by the porch, sporting my best casual chic outfit. Faded jeans, a Hawaiian shirt so loud it offended even my own sensibilities, and sunglasses to hide my gleeful anticipation. As guests politely trampled what was left of my garden bed, sipping champagne and munching hors d'oeuvres, I just smiled and waved like the helpful neighbor everyone assumed I was. Little did they know, my hospitality had an expiration date fast approaching. Then came the sound I'd been eagerly awaiting, a low, menacing growl echoing faintly from down the street. At first, Karen didn't notice. She was busy adjusting a floral centerpiece with surgical precision, completely oblivious. But soon the low rumble grew louder, more unmistakable. Heads turned, conversations dimmed, and glasses of champagne began trembling subtly. Karen stood frozen, eyes narrowed suspiciously, ears perked like an overly manicured Doberman. "What is that?" she demanded sharply, whirling towards the hapless caterer. He shrugged helplessly, juggling trays of salmon tartare. Before anyone could answer, a roaring parade of Harley-Davidsons thundered gloriously into view, engines snarling, leather jackets glittering defiantly in the sunlight. Leading the pack was Chains himself, decked out in a studded tuxedo jacket, aviators, and, yes, a top hat. Behind him, Darcy waved cheerfully, a huge bass guitar strapped proudly across her shoulders. I grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. "Showtime! Oh, my God!" Karen shrieked, clipboard dropping dramatically onto a platter of shrimp cocktails. "Who invited these hooligans?" "Relax, Karen," I called cheerfully. "Just a few friends stopping by. HOA rules do encourage neighborhood gatherings, right?" She spun towards me, sputtering furiously. "I specifically checked. They can't be here. They're not on the guest list." "Well, neither am I said innocently. "Yet, here we are." Without further ado, Chains parked his gleaming bike, threw a leg over dramatically, and strode directly toward me. We high-fived enthusiastically, causing several guests to clutch their pearls. "Ready for the party, Dan?" "Born ready," I grinned, nodding to Darcy. She and the band quickly unloaded their gear, an intimidating collection of amps, guitars, and equipment stacked taller than Karen's champagne tower. Before anyone could protest, Darcy leaned into her microphone with a charismatic grin. "Ladies and gentlemen, by special request, we've got a wedding gift from your lovely neighbor Dan. Hope you enjoy the metal remix of your favorite wedding classics." At that precise moment, my backyard exploded in glorious chaos. Darcy's guitar shrieked to life with a spectacularly distorted version of "Here Comes the Bride," amplified to volumes typically reserved for stadium rock concerts. The guests jumped, startled by the blast of sound, nearly dropping their expensive hors d'oeuvres onto my poor flattened herbs. "Stop this madness immediately!" Karen screamed, waving her hands desperately, but her voice vanished beneath Chain's enthusiastic drumming and Darcy's thunderous vocals. Ashley, surprisingly, didn't seem upset. Instead, she laughed in relief, kicked off her heels, and joined some younger guests dancing near the improvised stage. Clearly, rebellion was contagious. Desperate, Karen dashed toward a deputy who'd arrived, undoubtedly summoned by frantic texts. The officer leaned casually against his cruiser, smiling lazily. "Do something," she shouted, red-faced. He shrugged innocently. "Noise ordinance doesn't kick in until 10, ma'am. They're legal." Karen stared in disbelief, mouth agape, as the officer winked knowingly at me. Small-town connections had their advantages. Chains and Darcy, meanwhile, launched enthusiastically into a heavy metal rendition of Sweet Caroline, complete with roaring solos and synchronized head-banging. Guests, initially horrified, soon found themselves secretly tapping toes and bobbing heads, losing their resistance as the absurdity sank in. Karen's meticulously planned, Pinterest-worthy ceremony had dissolved into a spectacular, roaring circus of leather, laughter, and rebellious guitars. The chaos was perfect, the revenge deliciously sweet. Watching Karen fume helplessly in the middle of the chaos, her perfectly coiffed hair vibrating angrily with every beat, I felt deeply satisfied. Yet just as I thought victory was secure, my phone buzzed urgently in my pocket. It was a text from Chains, who had briefly stepped aside after his drum solo. "We've got a problem. Karen's husband just showed up, and you're not going to believe this." I glanced toward the driveway, heart suddenly thumping wildly. Just when I thought this revenge plan couldn't get any crazier, the unthinkable was about to unfold. Standing frozen in place, I started toward the driveway, half expecting HOA Karen's husband, Charles, usually an obedient shadow behind Karen's iron-fisted rule, to emerge in a flurry of righteous anger. Instead, he stumbled from his silver Mercedes, wide-eyed, clearly stunned by the rock concert and biker carnival currently swallowing his daughter's carefully planned wedding. But it wasn't Charles who had Chains so alarmed. It was the figure stepping from the passenger's side, a sharply dressed woman in a navy suit, crisp hair pulled back, carrying a sleek leather portfolio emblazoned unmistakably with the City Zoning Commission's logo. Her name was Vivian Hartley, a local zoning officer notoriously feared by suburban busybodies and amateur landscapers alike, and her presence meant only one thing: trouble. HOA Karen spotted her immediately, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. With a triumphant shriek audible even above Darcy's screaming guitar solo, Karen barreled toward Vivian, manicured nails waving frantically, voice pitched higher than a tea kettle at boiling point. "Vivian, thank heavens you're here," Karen panted, gesturing wildly towards me and my rebellious guests. "This man and his hooligans are violating neighborhood harmony, possibly several city ordinances. Shut 'em down immediately." Vivian paused, eyes taking in the scene with clinical precision. Bikers lounging on patio furniture, neighbors dancing barefoot, Darcy's epic heavy metal guitar solos shaking the fence boards loose. Slowly, methodically, she turned towards me, walking purposefully in my direction. I braced for impact, feeling victory slipping rapidly from my grasp. "You're Mr. Evans, correct?" she asked coolly, scanning me critically from head to Hawaiian-shirted toe. "I am," I replied cautiously, praying silently to whatever deity presided over backyard rebellions. She flipped open her leather binder, tapping efficiently at a map. "According to city records, your property extends precisely 58 feet past that fence line, correct?" I nodded slowly, confused but wary. "Sounds about right, yeah." Karen, unable to restrain herself, burst forward impatiently. "Yes, Vivian, that's exactly the issue. He's been abusing this property for unauthorized events." Vivian raised one imperious hand, silencing Karen instantly. A sight so satisfying it should have been bottled and sold as therapy. "Mrs. Karen," she intoned firmly, "please allow me to finish." Karen shrank back, affronted yet silent. A hush settled over my yard, guests and bikers alike turning curiously to watch. Vivian returned her calm gaze to me. "Well, Mr. Evans, I've spent this morning carefully reviewing the neighborhood zoning files. Curiously, it seems your property predates the formation of this particular HOA charter." I felt hope surge unexpectedly, suspicion sharpening my tone. Vivian offered the faintest hint of a smile. "A rare gem indeed. Your property line, as it happens, does not officially fall under HOA jurisdiction. It predates it significantly, meaning neither Mrs. Karen nor the HOA board holds any legal authority whatsoever over your land usage." There was stunned silence, deliciously thick and immensely satisfying. You must be mistaken," Karen spluttered indignantly, clipboard clutched defensively to her chest like a life raft. "The entire neighborhood falls within our rules. I've triple checked." Vivian turned slowly, icy professionalism incarnate. "Unfortunately for you, Mrs. Karen, legalities don't operate on your personal assumptions. Mr. Evans's property is legally exempt from your HOA. It always has been." Karen visibly deflated, disbelief washing away her triumph as quickly as it had arrived. Guests murmured quietly, phones discreetly recording Karen's mortification for posterity. "But what about the noise?" Karen pleaded weakly, grasping at straws. Vivian glanced briefly toward Chains and Darcy, who smiled innocently, pretending not to notice. "City ordinance clearly states noise restrictions only begin after 10 o'clock. Unless Mr. Evans's concert continues late into the night, they're perfectly within the law." Chains immediately threw up enthusiastic devil horns in silent salute, grinning wickedly behind Vivian's back. Darcy winked at me conspiratorially. Karen's shoulders slumped, defeat now clearly etched on her formerly imperious face. Guests, sensing the sudden shift in power dynamics, began edging discreetly toward the buffet table, eager to distract themselves from Karen's humiliation. Ashley, surprisingly, walked over calmly, placing a gentle hand on her mother's trembling shoulder. "Mom," she said quietly but firmly, "I think it's time we stop fighting this. Let's just enjoy it." Karen, thoroughly overwhelmed, slumped wordlessly onto a nearby folding chair, one tragically placed directly atop my flattened zucchini. At this poetic justice, I allowed myself a small, victorious smirk. Vivian closed her portfolio briskly. "Now, if there's nothing else, I'll lead you to your festivities. Congratulations, Mr. Evans, on reclaiming your property rights." She turned sharply, heels clicking purposefully toward the Mercedes. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, heart thundering triumphantly in my chest. Chain slapped my shoulder, laughing heartily. Brother, remind me never to get on your bad side. You've got luck and legality on your team. I grinned, euphoric. Karen's reign of manicured terror was officially crumbling thanks to an obscure zoning technicality I hadn't even known existed. But just when victory seemed absolute, Karen stood again, eyes flashing dangerously, a new resolve sharpening her features. You think you've won? She hissed bitterly, fists clenched. This isn't over, Dan. You've embarrassed the wrong person today. You'll regret this, I promise. Before I could respond, she spun dramatically, storming toward her minions near the punch bowl. Chains watched her retreat skeptically. Think she's bluffing? Probably not, I sighed. Karen types never surrender without a last stand. Darcy, tuning her guitar mischievously, chuckled. Well, then I suppose we better keep the amps plugged in and guitars loud. I nodded, preparing myself mentally. We'd won the battle, but the war was far from finished. Little did we know, Karen's next move would elevate our small suburban rebellion into an epic neighborhood clash no one in Pine Valley would ever forget. If anyone thought the battle was done after Vivian's zoning smackdown, they clearly hadn't spent enough time dealing with a professional suburban tyrant like HOA Karen. As the sun dipped lower, bathing my backyard in a soft orange glow, the initial chaos transformed into a relaxed, jubilant atmosphere. Neighbors laughed, Chains and Darcy played triumphant encores, and even Ashley, finally freed from her mother's control, was barefoot and smiling for the first time today. For a brief moment, victory tasted as sweet as the slightly crushed zucchinis under Karen's chair, but the peace predictably didn't last long. Just as Darcy strummed the opening chords of Living on a Prayer to enthusiastic cheers, the tranquility shattered again, this time courtesy of a shiny white SUV with the unmistakable Pine Valley HOA logo emblazoned ominously on its door. Out stepped Todd Pritchard, Pine Valley HOA's infamous compliance officer, a man whose khaki pants and tucked polo shirt practically screamed suburban enforcer. Todd adjusted his sunglasses, clutching an official-looking clipboard with the gravity of a UN inspector entering contested territory. Oh, look, Chains drawled sarcastically from beside me. The cavalry arrived in beige slacks. Todd approached briskly, expression stern and official. Behind him, Karen marched victoriously, smug satisfaction oozing from every pore. She folded her arms, clearly savoring the return of power to her well-manicured grasp. Mr. Evans, Todd began firmly, voice raised to combat Darcy's enthusiastic guitar riff. I'm here to serve you an official HOA cease and desist order for your unauthorized gathering and disturbing neighborhood peace. I blinked, incredulous. Todd, we just established I'm not under HOA jurisdiction. City zoning confirmed it. That may be, Todd replied mechanically, not missing a beat. But the street leading here, the street your guest parked on, is HOA maintained. According to HOA Regulation 27 subsection B, gatherings over 10 guests require written HOA approval. Clearly, you are in direct violation. Karen practically beamed, whispering loudly, Did you really think I wouldn't have a backup plan? I felt my jaw tighten, irritation bubbling dangerously again. Around us, guests began whispering anxiously. Chains growled quietly, knuckles cracking. You want us to handle this, Evans? No violence yet, Chains, I muttered grimly. I got this. I stepped toward Todd calmly, refusing to let my irritation show. So you're fining me for people parking on the street? Todd nodded sharply. Precisely. Violations come with immediate fines, currently totaling $5,000. Barton grinned triumphantly, eyes sparkling vindictively. She clearly expected surrender, defeat finally written on my face. But she miscalculated again. My rage had hardened into cold, calculated determination. Interesting, I said slowly, pulling out my own phone. Then by your logic, you're obligated to issue identical fines to everyone who parked along that road today, right? Todd paused uncertainly. Well, technically, yes. I waved dramatically to Karen's stunned wedding guests who immediately fell silent. Friends, neighbors, I announced cheerfully, amplifying my voice above Darcy's now muted guitar. The HOA says everyone parked on the street owes a $5,000 fine, courtesy of Karen here. Be sure to thank her personally. Gasps erupted, shocked faces spinning toward Karen, whose triumphant smile now collapsed spectacularly. Wait, what? Stammered Karen, suddenly panic-stricken. No, that's not what. Todd, clarify. Todd shifted nervously. Technically, Mr. Evans is correct. Regulations apply equally. The crowd buzzed angrily, murmurs growing louder by the second. Greg, my neighbor who had earlier mistaken me for staff, stepped forward indignantly. Karen, seriously? You invited us here knowing we'd get fined. Oh, Greg, it's a misunderstanding, she pleaded desperately, but no one listened. Her carefully cultivated community support evaporated instantly, replaced by furious betrayal. Neighbors who previously stood neutral now glared openly, phones out, undoubtedly already texting angry messages to friends and family. Jeans chuckled darkly beside me. Nicely played, Evans. But Karen, now cornered, reacted explosively. Fine, Evans, she shouted, voice shrill and cracking. You want war? I'll give you war. Todd, call the towing company. Tow every car off this street immediately. Todd hesitated, but she screamed louder. Now! The entire yard froze, silence heavy and electric. Darcy lowered her guitar. Guests stared nervously. Bikers clenched fists, ready to defend their bikes. This had officially escalated from suburban drama to a full-scale neighborhood standoff. But just as Todd reluctantly reached for his phone, a firm voice interrupted sharply. No one's towing anything. Ashley stepped forward decisively, her face determined. All eyes swung toward her, including Karen's. Mom, enough. Stop this insanity. Karen's mouth fell open, staring incredulously as her daughter calmly stripped off her veil, tossing it dramatically into the compost heap nearby. You want to control, Mom? Ashley said clearly, but not anymore. This wedding is over. Your petty war is done. I felt a wave of respect and relief. Ashley had stepped up, reclaiming her day and decisively shutting down her mother's tantrum. Karen stood speechless, visibly trembling. Ashley, expression fierce, turned to me and nodded appreciatively. But as relief swept through me, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it wasn't quite over yet. Because even though Ashley's defiance had momentarily silenced Karen, a sudden, chilling realization crossed my mind. People like HOA Karen never accepted defeat quietly. If anything, the humiliation she'd just endured only guaranteed she'd soon unleash one final act of retaliation. And this time, it would be her craziest yet. The guests, now thoroughly annoyed and murmuring angrily, began filtering out, leaving behind abandoned hors d'oeuvres, toppled champagne glasses, and crumpled napkins strewn across my yard. Karen stood frozen, staring blankly as Ashley calmly walked off, quietly comforting friends and neighbors she'd hardly seen during her mother's over-orchestrated ceremony. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that Karen had finally, mercifully surrendered. But Karen wasn't finished, not even close. When cornered, an HOA tyrant will always find one more desperate card to play, no matter how irrational or dramatic. She turned suddenly, eyes blazing, a dangerous smile creeping onto her face like an impending storm. Without a word, she spun on her heels and marched purposefully toward my small gardening shed at the yard's edge. What's she doing? Chains asked skeptically, eyes narrowing suspiciously. Honestly, I sighed wearily. I stopped understanding Carolyn's thought processes around the zucchini incident. Carolyn reached the shed door and paused dramatically, turning toward us with exaggerated flair, as if she expected a cinematic soundtrack to accompany her every move. Attention, everyone, she called sharply, regaining a little of her previously shattered confidence. Heads turned hesitantly toward her, anticipating another outburst. If I can't have my daughter's perfect wedding today, neither can you enjoy your little circus. Chains and Darcy exchanged glances, tension thickening the air like sour milk. What could she possibly have in mind now? She wrenched open the shed door theatrically, revealing a cluttered interior filled with gardening tools and bags of fertilizer. Karen pointed dramatically inside, face twisted in self-righteous triumph. This, everyone, is Mr. Evans's illegal stockpile of hazardous chemicals. I demand an immediate environmental inspection. Chains choked on his drink, sputtering laughter. Darcy raised an incredulous eyebrow. Serious, lady? You're calling Miracle-Gro hazardous? And I stepped forward, shaking my head slowly. Karen, that's gardening fertilizer, literally from Home Depot. I use it on tomatoes. But Karen wasn't listening. She waved frantically to Todd, whose clipboard had by now become a protective shield against emotional outbursts. Todd, Notify authorities immediately. This man's dangerous chemicals threaten neighborhood safety. Mrs. Karen, I'm really not sure. Todd began weakly, clearly praying for divine intervention. But Karen ignored him, now shouting wildly into her phone. Yes, hello, Pine Valley Environmental Control. I'm reporting a toxic chemical threat on private property. Send a team immediately. Chains whispered loudly. Does she even hear herself? Karen turned triumphantly, pointing dramatically at me, eyes burning with obsessive determination. You thought you'd beaten me, Evans, but illegal storage of hazardous chemicals is a felony. Enjoy prison. The yard went utterly silent. Ashley stared in disbelief, face paled. Even the bikers looked stunned by Karen's desperate theatrics. I sighed deeply, stepping toward her calmly. Karen, I spoke gently, keeping my voice level. I understand you're upset. You've had a long day. But please, calm down before you embarrass yourself any further. But Karen was beyond reason, smiling maniacally. You're finished. You hear me? Finished. Just then, a sleek environmental control truck pulled up slowly, adding absurdity to an already surreal scene. Two bored-looking agents emerged hesitantly, glancing around at half-eaten appetizers and scattered champagne flutes, expressions growing increasingly skeptical. Where's the hazardous threat? One agent asked dryly. Karen practically dragged him toward the shed, pointing triumphantly at the bags of harmless fertilizer. The agents glanced briefly inside, exchanged puzzled looks, then turned slowly back to Karen with synchronized expressions of disbelief. Ma'am, the second agent drawled slowly, deliberately. This is gardening fertilizer. It's completely safe. Karen blinked, bewildered. No, check again. It's toxic. He's breaking the law. The agent sighed audibly, looking toward me with sympathy. Sir, we're sorry to disturb you. Clearly, there's been a misunderstanding. We'll be on our way. No, wait, Karen shouted desperately. But the agents were already climbing back into their truck, muttering audibly about suburban dramatics and wasting taxpayer money. I shook my head tiredly as the truck drove off, leaving Karen alone, humiliated once more, staring vacantly at the shed door as reality sank in. Around her, neighbors slowly dispersed, shaking heads sadly, finally recognizing her spiral into absurdity had gone too far. Ashley walked gently toward her mother, voice quiet but firm. Mom, stop. Just stop. Karen stood silently, clipboard finally slipping from limp fingers onto the grass. It was over. She had truly lost. But before relief could fully sink in, Chains clapped me roughly on the shoulder, chuckling wryly. Hey, Evans, he whispered mischievously, pointing discreetly toward Karen's abandoned clipboard. Isn't that her official HOA records? That idea, absurd, daring yet wonderfully poetic, flashed through my mind. Perhaps Karen had unknowingly gifted me one final, perfect opportunity, because just when I thought the battle was won, I realized something incredibly valuable had just fallen into my lap, something powerful enough to permanently end HOA Karen's reign of suburban terror once and for all. The clipboard lay in the grass like a downed weapon, its rhinestone accents catching the last light of day as if mocking its defeated owner. I bent down, picked it up, and flipped through the pages with casual curiosity, and then froze. Chains leaned over my shoulder. What's that look for? These aren't just her HOA notes, I muttered. This is everything. Fines, complaints, citations, most of them unsigned, some addressed to properties that aren't even part of the HOA. And this one, look at this. Karen's been collecting special event fees for years, straight to a personal PayPal account. Chains whistled. Well, well, looks like the Queen built her kingdom on a landfill of fake fines. Darcy peered over. Is that a reimbursement slip for a new spa chair, labeled as community wellness equipment? Oh, yeah, I said, eyes scanning fast now. And here, she marked my shed as temporary event storage. That's how she justified the wedding. But the kicker, my address isn't even on her HOA jurisdiction map. A beat of silence passed before Chains said what we were all thinking. You're going to burn her little empire to the ground, aren't you? Not me, I said with a slow grin. The neighborhood. The next morning, I made about 20 discreet visits. Coffee in hand, charm turned to max. I visited every neighbor who'd ever been fined for lawn height violations, holiday decorations, unapproved mailbox styles, or my favorite, excessive wind chime activity. I showed them the documents. I let them read every petty fake rule and self-approved fee. And they were mad. Gloriously, righteously, foam at the mouth mad. By noon, a small crowd had formed on my lawn, murmuring furiously. By 2:00 p.m., it had tripled. Old man Whitaker even brought his fold-out chair and a sign reading, "Karen stole my bird bath." Greg arrived with a box of donuts and a stack of every fake warning letter Karen had ever sent him. He'd kept them for the lawsuits I always dreamed of but never filed. At 3:00 p.m., Ashley arrived with the piece de resistance, an old HOA charter Karen had accidentally hidden in a filing cabinet. It clearly stated that if gross misconduct or financial mismanagement were ever discovered, the president could be immediately recalled with enough signatures. By 3:30 p.m., we had them. The emergency HOA meeting took place that evening, on my lawn, naturally. Karen had no clue what was coming. She arrived late, flustered, wearing a tracksuit and sunglasses like she was being hunted by TMZ. Todd tried to speak but was drowned out by a unified crowd chant, "Resign, resign." Karen stood in front of her neighbors, people she'd once intimidated with rulers and citations, now armed with receipts and rage. "You can't do this," she barked. "I've given my life to this community." "Exactly," Sandra from next door said. "And now we're taking it back." Ashley stepped forward, handed her a folded piece of paper, and said quietly, "It's done, Mom." Karen opened it, read the signatures, and for the first time in her rule-obsessed life, she was truly speechless. She didn't cry. Karen doesn't cry, but she did walk away, silent, small, and thoroughly dethroned. Weeks passed. The grass started growing in again. My garden returned, slowly but stubbornly. One of the goats adopted by the neighborhood was now named Zucchini in honor of the fallen heroes. The HOA reorganized with new leadership. Greg, surprisingly, was elected president. His first rule, mind your business unless it's your yard. Ashley and her husband hosted a potluck under the pecan tree, barefoot, no tent, no clipboard in sight. They laughed the whole time. Even Darcy showed up with the band and played an acoustic version of Here Comes a Bright, just because. As for me, I sat on my porch, beer in hand, goats snoring beside me, watching fireflies blink above the new sapling we planted where Karen's ridiculous altar once stood. Somewhere out there, Karen's probably scheming a comeback, maybe in another neighborhood, clipboard reloaded. But here, she won't be back. Because the HOA doesn't rule my yard anymore. The community does. And sometimes all it takes is one loud wedding, a few screaming goats, and a biker choir to remind people of something simple. Rules matter, but respect matters more. And when someone tries to steal your yard, your peace, or your tomatoes, you remind them why fences exist, not to keep people out, but to draw the line right where it matters most. You know, this story wasn't just about goats, guitars, and revenge served biker style. It was about drawing a damn line, literally and figuratively. It's easy to let control freaks steamroll your piece one clipboard at a time, but the moment you stand up, even in the most unconventional way, you remind people that respect can't be legislated by HOA bylaws. It's earned. So whether it's your garden, your porch, or just your right to blast Johnny Cash at 2 p.m., don't let anyone rewrite the rules on your turf. And hey, if you've ever dealt with a Karen, a fake fine, or just a neighbor who thought your bird feeder was a violation, drop your wildest HOA story in the comments. Smash that like button, subscribe for more Rebel Tales, and remember, sometimes the most powerful protest is a perfectly timed goat scream. Stay wild, stay grounded, and always defend your tomatoes.